The great hall of the alien palace was built to make any visitor feel small. Tall crystal pillars rose to the ceiling, glowing with soft blue light. Alien nobles in flowing robes stood in silence. Their jeweled crowns catching the light like fire. At the far end sat the princess of the Xylan Empire. Her silver hair braided with gold, her violet eyes cold and sharp. Before her stood Daniel, the human ambassador, wearing a plain dark suit that seemed out of place in such an extravagant court. The air was heavy. Every eye in the room watched. A trial of words had begun, though no one had officially declared it. The princess leaned forward, her voice carrying through the hall without effort. "Humans," she said, her tone like a blade, "are a young race. Weak, desperate, and always begging for scraps from greater powers." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Some nobles smirked, others raised their brows in surprise. Daniel's face did not change. He stood still, his hands at his sides. His dark eyes fixed on hers. The princess tilted her head slightly, waiting for him to defend himself. Instead, he simply looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, Daniel turned. His footsteps echoed on the crystal floor. He walked away from the throne, past the shocked nobles, past the guards with their spears of light. Gasps followed him like whispers. No one had ever turned their back on the princess during an audience. It was an insult of the highest order. The princess sat frozen. Her pride told her to call the guards, to drag him back and make him kneel. But something stopped her. For a brief moment, she had seen something in his eyes. Not anger, not fear, but disappointment. It was a strange feeling for her. A royal who had been feared and obeyed since birth. The hall remained silent long after he was gone. Advisors shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the princess and the now empty doorway. One finally spoke. "Your Highness." "Shall I order his arrest?" The princess waved a hand. "No," she said, her voice colder than before. "Let him go." But inside, she felt an unfamiliar sting. Her words had been meant to show dominance, to remind the court that the Xylan Empire bowed to no one. Yet the human silence had unsettled her in a way no defiance ever had. As the nobles murmured among themselves, she kept her eyes on the door he had walked through. Why had he said nothing? Why had he chosen silence over battle? That night, the court was still buzzing with talk of the event. Some claimed the human had been humiliated and left in shame. Others whispered that he had been making a silent threat, a warning more dangerous. Then words. The princess heard these whispers as she walked the marble corridors toward her private chambers. She tried to dismiss them, but her mind returned to the look in his eyes again and again. She remembered the first time she had met him. Weeks ago, he had been polite, measured. Never raising his voice, she had assumed this was weakness. Now, she wasn't so sure. Standing before the mirror in her chamber, she studied her own reflection. Her violet eyes were as sharp as ever, her crown resting perfectly in her hair, and yet, something in her expression seemed unsettled. She remembered the silence in the hall, the way it had stretched until the air itself felt heavy. She had meant to wound him, but somehow his silence had wounded her instead. In the quiet of the night, she found herself wondering, what could make a man stand before the most powerful woman in the empire, be insulted in front of hundreds, and walk away without a single word? Was it pride? Was it wisdom? Or was it something else entirely? The stars beyond her window glittered against the black sky. Somewhere out there, the human slept. Perhaps not thinking of her at all, but she could not stop thinking of him, and for reasons she did not yet understand. That unsettled her more than anything. The next morning, the palace was alive with whispers. Servants carrying trays paused in the hallways to gossip in hushed tones. Guards at their posts leaned toward each other, exchanging theories. Every noble seemed to have their own version of what had happened the day before. Some claimed the human ambassador had been broken by the princess's words. They said he left because he had no strength to fight back. Others believed the opposite, that his silence had been a challenge, a quiet declaration that he was beyond their insults. The truth was unknown, but the mystery only made the story grow. The princess sat in her private breakfast chamber, the golden light of the morning sun spilling across the long table. Her advisors stood around her, speaking in low voices. One, an older man with a thin silver crown, leaned forward. "Your Highness, this human may be more dangerous than he appears." She lifted an eyebrow. "Dangerous?" He walked away. The advisor shook his head. "Sometimes walking away is the most dangerous thing of all." She did not answer. Instead, she sipped her spiced tea, though her thoughts were not on the drink. She could still see the human's eyes and her mind calm, steady, unshaken. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Later that day, she wandered the palace gardens, a habit she took when her thoughts were troubled. The air was warm, carrying the scent of silver-leaf flowers. She walked past fountains, carved from glowing stone, the sound of water mingling with the distant hum of the city beyond the palace walls. Two handmaidens nearby whispered, not realizing the princess was close enough to hear. And he didn't even bow when he left. One said in disbelief, "I heard he refused to kneel when he first arrived in the city." The other replied. The princess slowed her steps, her eyes narrowing. The more she heard, the more this human began to seem less like an insulted guest and more like a puzzle. That night, the court gathered again for a diplomatic banquet. Golden light filled the dining hall. Music played softly in the background. The human was nowhere to be seen. Instead, seat at the long table sat empty, a silent reminder of his absence. Some nobles made jokes at his expense. Others avoided speaking of him altogether, as if his very name might draw trouble. The princess found herself scanning the room, half expecting him to appear. When he didn't, she felt a strange pull of disappointment. She told herself it was only because she disliked being ignored. But deep down, she wondered if there was something more. Later, in the quiet corridors, she encountered her younger brother, Prince Chiron. He was known for his curiosity and his habit of slipping past guards to wander the city. "I saw him today," Chiron said casually. Leaning against a marble pillar, the princess paused. "You saw the human?" "Yes," the prince replied, "down in the lower market. He was speaking with some of the city's less respected citizens." Her eyes narrowed. "Spies? Rebels?" Chiron shrugged. "Could be. Or maybe he just enjoys bad company." The thought stayed with her long after they parted. Why would a human ambassador spend his time with the poor and unwanted, instead of seeking favor with the court? It didn't fit the image she had of him that night. She stood on her balcony, watching the lights of the city flicker like stars below. Her people were loyal, proud, and sharp-tongued. They did not trust outsiders easily. And yet this human had done nothing but walk away. No demands, no complaints, no retaliation. It should have been the end of the matter, but somehow it felt like the beginning in the quiet. She remembered her advisor's words that morning. Sometimes walking away is the most dangerous thing of all. She did not want to believe it, but something deep inside told her they might be right. She tightened her grip on the balcony rail. If Daniel thought his silence had ended their game, he was mistaken. The princess of the Xylan Empire was not one to be ignored. She would find out exactly who he was, and why he had chosen silence over words, and when she did, she would decide whether he was an ally to keep or an enemy to destroy. Daniel moved through the narrow streets of the lower city like a shadow. The sun had already dipped below the jagged towers, leaving the alleys dim and cold. Merchants were packing away their goods, their glowing lanterns casting patches of gold on the dusty stones. Most palace envoys would never set foot here. It was too dirty, too dangerous, too far from the polished world of marble halls and crystal thrones. But Daniel was not here for comfort. He reached a small courtyard where a broken fountain stood. Dry, its statue of an alien warrior cracked and leaning. A few figures stepped out from the shadows. A hooded woman, a limping man, and a young alien boy whose large amber eyes scanned the street for danger. The woman spoke first, her voice low. "You shouldn't have come after what happened yesterday." Daniel shook his head. "I don't have a choice." He handed her a small data crystal, no bigger than a coin. "It's everything I've learned so far." He said, "If the guards find it on you, you're dead." The boy looked up at him. "Then why give it to her?" Daniel crouched down to meet the boy's eyes, his voice calm, because some things are worth the risk. From a rooftop across the street, a shadow moved. Daniel's eyes flicked upward, but the figure vanished before he could be sure. Still, he had the uneasy feeling of being watched. Back in the palace, the princess sat in her study, reviewing reports. Her brother Chiron had sent her a short message earlier that day. The human was in the lower city again. She had ordered a small team of discreet watchers to follow him. What they reported was confusing. The human met with people who were considered outcasts by her society, political exiles, half-blood children, former soldiers with no loyalty. To the crown, it made no sense for an ambassador to waste time on them, unless... Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was her chief advisor, carrying a sealed packet. "This came from our outer colonies," he said. "It concerns the human." She broke the seal and scanned the document. Her eyes narrowed, according to the report. Daniel had once been part of an interstellar rescue unit, a team that specialized in evacuating civilians from war zones. He was decorated for bravery, but had left under mysterious circumstances. The file ended there, redacted beyond that point. Meanwhile, in the lower city, Daniel spoke quietly with the hooded woman. "They're moving the prisoners in 2 days," she whispered. "If you're going to act, it has to be then." Daniel nodded. "Where?" She glanced around before answering. Under the palace, he felt the weight of those words. The prisoners were closer than he had expected, right beneath the feet of the woman who had called him lesser. If she knew what he was planning, it could mean death for him and everyone involved. Night deepened, and Daniel made his way back toward the upper city. He passed alien children sleeping in doorways, their small forms wrapped in thin blankets. A vendor offered him a cup of steaming broth, and he accepted, handing over a few credits. The warmth of the drink reminded him how long it had been since he had last rested. But there was no time for rest now. At the same time, the princess walked along the high balcony of the West Tower, the wind playing with the strands of her silver hair. She had been thinking of the human all day, and she hated it. Her world was built on order, loyalty, and the careful dance of diplomacy. Yet, this man moved like a piece that refused to follow the rules of the game, and she couldn't decide if that made him a threat or something else. In the distance, a faint light flickered in the lower city. She narrowed her eyes, as if by sheer will she could see through the streets and shadows to where Daniel walked. She thought of the silence in the throne room, the way he had turned without a word. That moment had felt like an ending, but now she wondered if it was actually the beginning of something far more dangerous. Daniel reached the gates of the upper city just before midnight. Guards gave him suspicious looks, but let him pass when they saw his ambassador's seal. He walked straight to his quarters, locking the door behind him. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small holodevice. Activating it, a faint blue light projected the image of a young alien woman, her wrists bound, her face pale but defiant. Daniel's jaw tightened. 2 days, he thought. 2 days to get her out. Asterisk. The palace gardens were quiet under the pale glow of the twin moons. Silver light spilled over the marble paths, making the fountains shimmer and the leaves glisten. The princess often came here at Night, when she wanted to think without the noise of the court, her guards kept their distance, leaving her to walk alone between the towering crystal trees. Tonight, her thoughts were heavy with unanswered questions. The human silence in the throne room still echoed in her mind. But now there were new puzzles. His meetings in the lower city, the strange people he spoke with, the whispers of him avoiding court events entirely. She told herself it didn't matter. Yet somehow, she kept searching for reasons behind his actions as she turned down a narrow path near the outer wall. She froze, ahead, in the shadow of a tall tree. Someone knelt beside a small figure. She stepped closer silently, the moonlight catching a familiar profile. It was him. Daniel knelt on the grass, his jacket laid over the shivering shoulders of an alien child. The child's skin was pale blue, and his thin arms clutched the fabric tightly. Daniel spoke in a low, calm voice. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you here." The child looked up at him with wide eyes. "But the guards, they'll send me away." Daniel shook his head. "Not tonight." The princess felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest. This man, who had been so cold in the court, was here in the shadows, risking his position to protect a child who clearly didn't belong in the palace. Why? She stepped forward, her voice breaking the quiet. "You should explain yourself, human." Daniel didn't turn immediately. Instead, he helped the child stand, keeping a hand on the boy's shoulder. When he finally looked at her, his expression was calm, unreadable. "There's nothing to explain," he said softly. He needed help. Her eyes narrowed. "You are in the royal gardens after dark with a stranger. Hiding him from my guards, that demands an explanation." Daniel's gaze met hers without flinching. "If I explain, will it change what you think of me?" She hesitated, surprised by the question. "I think," she said slowly, "that you are playing a dangerous game." Daniel stood, his hand still resting on the boy's shoulder. "I'm not playing," he replied. "I'm protecting." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unshakable. The princess took a step closer. Studying the boy, he looked no older than 10. With dirt on his cheeks and fear in his eyes, something about him, his delicate features, the faint markings on his skin told her he was not from the palace staff or any noble family. She realized with a jolt that he was an exile's child. If the court found him here, he would be taken away instantly. "Do you know what will happen if anyone sees you?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Daniel said, his tone steady. "That's why I chose a place the guards don't patrol at this hour." Her mind raced. This was more than kindness. This was a calculated risk. But why would a human ambassador care so much for an alien child he had just met? The boy clung to Daniel's side, glancing nervously at her crown. Daniel looked down at him. "Go wait by the fountain." The boy hesitated, then obeyed. Moving to sit on the edge of the marble basin where the water glowed softly. Once the child was out of earshot, the princess stepped closer, her voice low. "You move in shadows. You meet with rebels. Now you hide children who have no place here." Daniel didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm. "Sometimes the law is wrong." Her eyes searched his face. She wanted to argue, to remind him that her empire's laws were the foundation of their order, but the conviction in his voice stopped her. For the first time, she wondered if his silence in the court had been less about avoiding conflict and more about choosing when to speak before she could say more. Movement flickered in the distance, a guard patrol turning down the path toward them. Daniel glanced at the boy, then back at her. "I need your word," he said, "that you won't hand him over." The princess hesitated. Every instinct told her to protect the law, but something deeper, something she couldn't name, made her say, "Go." Quickly, Daniel gave her a small nod, then took the boy's hand and led him into the shadows, disappearing into the night. She stood there long after they were gone, the sound of the fountain's water, the only thing breaking the silence. She told herself she had acted on impulse, that it was only a small mercy, but deep down, she knew she had just taken her first step into whatever dangerous game the human was playing. The next morning, the princess sent word for the human ambassador to meet her in one of the palace's smaller council chambers. It was a place far from the main court, quiet and without the ears of the nobles. Daniel arrived on time, his dark jacket still dusty from travel, his expression calm as ever. She dismissed the guards, leaving only the two of them in the tall sunlit room. For a moment, neither spoke. The princess stood by the window, looking out at the city, her back to him. Finally, she said, "Last night, you asked for my word, and I gave it." Daniel's voice was even, and you kept it. She turned to face him, her violet eyes sharp. "You will tell me why you risk yourself for strangers in my gardens," she said, "and you will tell me the truth, not the careful half-answers you give in court." Daniel studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak at all. When he finally answered, his voice was low. "That boy's mother is one of the prisoners being held under this palace." The words hit her like a blow. Her first instinct was to deny it, to tell him no such prisoners existed, but she knew better. Deep within the palace dungeons, there were cells for those the court wished to forget. "You speak as if you've seen her," she said cautiously. "I have," Daniel replied. "2 nights ago, in the lower city. She was being moved between holding points. I tracked her here." The princess stepped closer, her robes whispering against the stone floor. "You realize," she said, "that interfering in such matters could be seen as an act of war against my people?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "And keeping her locked away for nothing more than being born to the wrong family is an act of mercy." Her hands curled at her sides. His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they echoed thoughts she had buried long ago. The princess of the Xylan Empire was raised to believe in the law, in the system, but deep inside she had always known it was not perfect. "You are an ambassador," she said. "Your duty is to speak for your people, not to meddle in mine." Daniel shook his head. "My duty is to protect the innocent. No matter whose flag they live under." They stood in silence, the tension between them thick through the window. The sound of the city reached them, the distant hum of skycraft, the faint call of market vendors. Finally, she asked, "Why this woman? Why risk yourself for her?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "She saved my life once," he said simply, "during the border skirmishes 3 years ago. She pulled me out of a collapsed tunnel while her own people were dying around her. I owe her more than I can repay." The princess's breath caught. She had not expected this to be personal. "And the boy?" she asked quietly. "Her son," Daniel replied. "He doesn't know she's here. He thinks she was taken far away. If I can free her, I can reunite them." The princess turned away, walking slowly back to the window. Her thoughts were a storm. She had been taught to see outsiders as self-serving, always acting for their own gain. But this man was risking everything for someone who could give him nothing in return. "You're asking me to betray my own court," she said at last. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "I'm asking you to do what's right." She looked back at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit, but all she saw was quiet determination. It was the same look he had worn in the throne room the day she insulted him, the look she had mistaken for weakness. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "If I help you, I will lose the trust of my advisors. I may lose my throne." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Then you'll know you lost it for the right reason." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The morning light spilled between them, casting long shadows on the stone floor. The princess realized she was standing at the edge of a choice that could change everything for him, for the boy, for herself, and she wasn't sure which frightened her more. Making that choice or walking away from it, the storm broke without warning. By mid-afternoon, black clouds rolled over the city, and the palace lights flickered against the dim sky. But inside the princess's council chamber, the air felt heavier than the weather outside. A messenger burst in, bowing quickly before speaking. "Your Highness," he said breathlessly, "we have captured 3 intruders in the lower city." The princess frowned. "What kind of intruders?" The messenger hesitated, glancing toward Daniel, who stood at the far side of the room. "Foreign operatives," he said carefully. "One of them carries human identification." Daniel's body stiffened. He knew instantly who they were. The very allies helping him plan the prisoner's escape. "They will be questioned at once," the messenger continued. "The council suggests." Using the deep cells, the princess dismissed the messenger with a wave of her hand. When they were alone, she turned to Daniel. "They were with you, weren't they?" she asked, her tone low. Daniel didn't deny it. "Yes," he said simply. "And if they're taken to the deep cells, they won't survive." Her eyes narrowed. "You're asking me to interfere in the middle of an active investigation?" she said. "I'm telling you that the investigation is a lie," Daniel replied. "They're not here to harm your people. They're here because I asked them to be." Lightning flashed outside the tall windows. The princess paced slowly, her mind racing. Helping him now wouldn't just risk her position. It would openly pit her against the council if they suspected. Her loyalty had shifted. They would remove her from the throne without hesitation. Daniel stepped closer, his voice urgent. "If they break under questioning, everything we've worked for will be lost. They'll move the prisoner. I'll never find her again." She stared at him. "You're asking me to trade my crown for your mission?" she said. "I'm asking you to trade your crown for justice," Daniel replied, for a long moment. Only. The rain tapping against the glass filled the silence. Finally, she turned toward the door. "If I do this, there's no turning back," she said. Daniel's eyes locked on hers. There's no turning back either way. Within the hour, the princess had dismissed her regular guards and called upon 2 of her most loyal personal attendants, ones who owed their positions to her alone. She ordered them to prepare a sealed transport, claiming it was for urgent diplomatic movement to one of the outer districts. No one questioned her, though she could feel the weight of suspicious eyes following her through the halls. In the lower prison levels, torchlight flickered against damp stone. The 3 captured operatives were bound in a small cell, their faces pale but unbroken. The princess stepped inside, her presence drawing sharp, startled looks from the guards. "These prisoners are to be moved," she said, her voice commanding, "by my personal order." The guards shifted uncomfortably. "But, Your Highness, the council does not speak for me." She cut in, her tone sharp as a blade. Her gaze was cold, daring. Them to question her again. Moments later, the 3 prisoners were loaded into the transport. With Daniel slipping aboard just before the doors sealed, the princess stood outside for a final moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that when the council discovered this, they would see it as betrayal. But for reasons she still couldn't name, she didn't care. The transport sped through the storm, the rain streaking the windows like silver threads. Inside, Daniel leaned forward, speaking to the freed operatives in a low voice. "They'll move her tonight," one of them said. "We intercepted a message. They suspect an escape attempt." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That means we have hours at best," he said, from the driver's seat. The princess spoke without turning. "Then you'd better tell me exactly what you need me to do." Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt the ground shifting beneath her. This was no longer about a single prisoner or a debt Daniel felt he owed. It was about standing on the line between law and justice, and deciding which side to take. The rain outside grew heavier, drowning the city in a haze of water and light. Somewhere beneath the palace, a woman waited in chains, unaware that the most unlikely alliance in the Empire was moving to set her free, and above them all, in the storm, the future of both their worlds hung in the balance. The palace dungeons were a maze of narrow corridors and locked gates. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of cold stone and metal. Torches burned low, their light flickering against the walls, casting moving shadows that seemed to watch from every corner. Daniel moved ahead, his footsteps soft. The freed operatives closed behind. The princess walked with them, her royal cloak hidden beneath a plain black travel coat. Her crown was gone, her silver hair tied back. She looked nothing like the ruler who had once insulted the human in front of the entire court. They reached the final gate, heavy, reinforced, guarded by 2 soldiers who straightened in shock when they saw her. "Your Highness," one began, but she cut him off. "Open it," she ordered. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. "This area is sealed by the council's authority," one said, his voice low, her eyes narrowed. "And I am your princess." "Open it." The tension broke when one of Daniel's allies moved forward, slipping a stun baton from under his coat. In seconds, both guards were unconscious on the floor. The princess stared for a moment, then looked at Daniel. "Was that necessary?" she asked. He gave her the faintest hint of a smile. Only because asking nicely wouldn't have worked. Inside the cell, the woman sat with her back against the wall, her wrists chained, her head bowed. When the door opened, she lifted her face and her eyes widened in disbelief. "Daniel?" she whispered. He was at her side in 2 steps, kneeling to unlock her chains. "I told you I'd come," he said softly. Her voice shook. "I didn't believe you could." He glanced toward the princess. "I had help, for a moment." The woman's eyes met the princess's. There was no bow. No thanks. Only a quiet understanding between 2 women who knew what it meant to take risks. The group moved quickly through the halls, but alarms began to sound somewhere above. The council had discovered the missing prisoners. Boots pounded on the stone floors, shouts echoed down the corridors. They reached the outer gates just as the first squad of guards came into view. Daniel turned, ready to fight, but the princess stepped forward, her voice carrying like a command that could not be ignored. "Stand down," she shouted. The guards froze. "This is a royal order," she said sharply. "Anyone who raises a weapon will answer to me directly." No one moved. No one dared. In the silence that followed, the group passed through the gates and into the night, the heavy storm masking their escape. Hours later, far from the city, they stopped in a sheltered valley where the air smelled of rain and fresh earth. The rescued woman sat with her son, who clung to her as if he would never let go again. The princess stood apart, watching the reunion, her cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. Daniel approached quietly. "They'll be safe here," he said. She nodded. "The council will call for answers. They'll say I betrayed my people." He looked at her, his voice calm. "You didn't betray them. You showed them what real leadership looks like." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the sound of the rain filling the silence between them. No thanks were spoken, no promises made. Yet something unshakable had formed in that silence, a bond neither of them could fully name. Finally, the princess asked, "Will you return to your people now?" Daniel's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Not yet," he said. "There are others still waiting for someone to speak for them." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that the rain on her cloak brushed against his shoulder. "Then when you need an ally," she said quietly, "you know where to find one." They didn't shake hands. They didn't bow. They simply looked at each other, 2 very different people who had stood on opposite sides of the same truth, and chosen the harder path when Daniel finally turned to leave. The princess didn't call after him. She only watched as he walked away into the mist, his figure fading into the gray light of dawn. And for the first time since she had met him, She understood the power of his silence. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't fear. It was the choice to let actions speak where words could never be enough. And in that choice, she found a respect she had never given to anyone before.